Lovely. It's recording to the cloud.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, so let's try and get going straight away. Nice to see everyone back after the enforced break pre-Pesach and then the pre-planned Pesach break. I hope everyone is well and doing okay. So we're learning the Gemara in Shabbos, Daf Ein Gimel Amud Beis, and the source text that we're looking at is a very short one. It's a continuation of the melachos in the Mishkan. The Kotzer. By the way, I think everyone at the moment is muted, but if anyone wants to ask a question, please feel free to just unmute yourself and ask a question as per the normal format. The Kotzer. So the Gemara focuses on the next melacha that it's looking at, the melacha of Kotzer, and it brings a brisa, which we're by now familiar somewhat with the format of the brisa. Tana HaKotzer HaBotzer VaHaGoder VaMasik VaOra Kula Melacha Achasein. They're all one melacha. Omer Papa Haiman the Shot Pisa Ledikla VaOsatomri. Someone who threw a clod of earth at a palm tree and it knocked off some dates. Chayv Shtaim is Chayv 2. Achas Mishum Tolesh, one because of plucking, which is presumably linked to Kotzer. Achas Mishum Mafarik, and one to do with dismantling, which is another melacha. We'll see the Rishonim that talk about what melacha it is. This is not the way of Talisha and not the way of Prika, and therefore one will not be chayiv for doing these melachas. So there's 6 things really that I wanted to focus on in this share. Not today specifically, but over the next few shiurim on the sugya. The first is, what is Katsira, and what's the relationship between Katsira and these other things that the Gemara lists in the Brisa. The Brisa lists Botzer, Goder, and Masik Ora. These are all different forms of harvesting different fruits, olives and grapes. The classic of Melacha, as per the Mishnah, is part of Sidura de Pas, is the 11 melachos, associated with producing bread, and therefore means Katsira, harvesting of wheat or barley. The Mishkan, the case where the melacha took place in the Mishkan, is that of herbs, some ammonim, that were grown to produce the dyeing of the cloth in the Mishkan. So what about harvesting through other forms? Botzer and Goder and Masik and Ora. I'm no expert on other forms of harvesting, but they're not done in the same way as Kotzer is. Kotzer is taking hold of the sheaths, the various standing corns, and using a scythe to harvest them. When it comes to picking grapes, one does this differently. I lived in Israel for many years near an olive grove, and we used to watch the harvesting of the olives, and they hit the tree, and that causes the olives to fall down onto a rug or a mat, which they had laid under the tree in advance. And this is a very different way of harvesting again. So the first question is, these other forms of harvesting listed in the Mishnah, what is their relationship to Kotzer? Are they of us, or told us, or some other form of relationship? And that's the first topic. The second topic is, what is the melacha of Kotzer? I've printed in the handout sheet a piece from Reb Chaim Brisker. When we look at it in more detail, I'll explain what that piece is. That he discusses what is the essence of the melacha of Kotzer. Is Kotzer detaching things? Is it removing it from the ground within which it grows? Is it removing something from its source of growth? This is all a little unclear. What exactly is the melacha of Kotzer, of harvesting? There's many things that go on when I take this grain of this ear of corn, the stalk of corn, and I detach it from the ground. What exactly is the geder of the melacha? So this is a second issue. I sent late last night a new handout sheet, which is worth printing and having a look at, which brings some of the relevant sources relevant to this second question of what exactly Katsira is. The third question we'll look at is, what is Tolesh? Because suddenly the Gemara introduces a new word that hasn't been mentioned previously when it discusses this shot piece, or somebody throws this clod of earth at the palm tree. It suddenly talks about Tolesh. What is Tolesh? That's the third question. And then we leave the topic of Kotzer, and we move on to this new idea that the Gemara has introduced, which is mafarik. And the question is, what is mafarik? That's the fourth topic of the sugya. And the fifth topic of the sugya is Tosfos introduces cholev, milking, as an example of mafarik, and therefore I want to look at what is cholev, what is milking on Shabbos. And finally, the very last words of the Gemara of Ashi, who says, Ein derech tlisha b'kach, ein derech pirika b'kach. What exactly does that mean? It isn't the way to do it, and therefore what? How does it not being the way to do it? How does that have an effect on the melacha? So those are 6 talking points in the sugya. I would like to touch on all of them, though perhaps some of them appear in many sugyas, and therefore we'll just touch on them, particularly the last one maybe we won't go into too much depth about, but I'd like to touch on those 6 points. Now, looking at the issue of what the relationship between Kotzer, Boitzer, Goider, Masik, and Ora are, the Rambam, which by now we're somewhat familiar with, hopefully, and I put the Rambam in the source sheets in Perek Zayin Halacha Daled. The Rambam says, "V'chein echad hakotzer tzvua, o kitnius, or boitzer novim, or goider tomorim, or masik zeisim, or uret eidim, kol elu av melachos hein." They're all av melachos. Shekol achas mehem la'akadova migadona miskavin. In all of them, you intend to uproot something from its place of growth, and therefore they are all avos melacha. So here the Rambam is following his general theory, which we've seen many times, that it's a mistake to think of an av as just being one action, or one type of activity, and all other similar activities are told us. No, this isn't correct. Similar activities, which are literally just different emotions and different movements, but aimed at achieving the identical result in a analogous manner, are co-ovus. They're co-ovus as opposed to being merely told us. So this is the Rambam that yet again expresses this view, and we saw, and we're not going to go through this in great length, but we saw previously a lot of discussion in the Kesef Mishnah and the Magen Mishnah and the commentaries on the Rambam exactly when the border is. At what point does something become sufficiently different that it becomes a tolda, and at which point does it remain an av? This remains sometimes a little bit hard to determine, but either way, something which is very much analogous and aimed at achieving the same end, the Rambam would argue is called a ko-av as opposed to a tolda. Now, importantly, in terms of our future discussions, the Rambam tells us what is the commonality between all of these, and he says, "Shekol achas mehem la'akar dova migdurov miskavin." In all of them, they are aimed at uprooting something from its giddle, from its growth. And therefore the Rambam seems to tell us that the melachot of Kotzer is uprooting something from its growth, though we'll come back to that. And since this is the commonality between all of them, then that's what determines it as one melacha. Similarly, the Rambam again, and we've seen this before, talks about miskavin, what the person intends to do, the goal, the totzar, the result of what the person's trying to achieve. And this is again something important in Hilchos Shabbos, that it's result orientated. The melachos of Shabbos, we use the word melacha. It's not just a mice, it's not just an action, but it's achieving a certain creative result. It's taking things forward and changing the world and altering it in various important ways. We saw in the Mishnah that there's different outcomes or series of steps taken to achieve a particular outcome. So, for example, our series is one of Sidura Dapat, is part of the series of creating bread, and each step in the 11 steps are moving things forward towards food production. And therefore all of these, what is the step in food production that's taking place over here? The answer is uprooting something from its place of growth. So therefore this is what the Rambam says, that this is what makes these all into one ko-melacha. Finally, just to remind you of some of the things we've been talking about till now, you will remember that the Mishnah lists the melachas as from the point of view of the doer. So the Mishnah says hachoresh, the one who plows, hakotzer, the one who harvests, hazorea, the one who sows the seeds, etc. The Rambam changes these to the activity, hacharisha, plowing, haktsira, harvesting. And again, this is consistent with the Rambam's view, who seems to see the determinants of the melacha as being the end result, as achievement of a result, as opposed to a particular activity or action. So this is the view of the Rambam. I printed on the handout sheets the opinion of the Meiri, who disagrees with the Rambam. And if you just look at that source, the Meiri says, HaKotzer, V'hu Av L'Zoroim, the Kotzer is the Av, and it refers to seeds, to when you harvest seeds. The Toldos Shaloi, and the Toldos are Boitzer B'Novim, the Goda B'Tmorim, the Mosik V'Zeisim, the Uri B'Teinim, the Zumeim, and etc., etc. So the Meiri lists Kotzer as the Av, and all the other versions, like Boitzer and Goda and Mosek, as the Toldos. So this really gets down to the same discussion as to the reading of the Brisa that we've had earlier up in the Omud. Tano, says the Gemara, HaKotzer, HaBoitzer, HaGoda, HaNasim, Kulam Melacha Achasein. So the Rambam understands that to mean they're all literally one Melacha, in others they're all others. And the Meiri understands it to mean that they are Av the Tolda. This is the Machlokas we've seen. Now, right at the beginning of Daf Ayin Gimel, when we started looking at these Melachos, we referenced various other examples of where the Torah talks about activities analogous to those of Masechet Shabbat, and where it isn't so obvious that we have the concept of Toldos. And I just want to remind you of some of those Maramakom, some of those sources, to help us understand a little bit better what's going on. So, for example, there is a lav in the Torah not to be goizes kodshim. If you have a carbon, you shouldn't shear the wool off the kodshim, and this is similar to one of the melachos of Shabbos, which is goizes. Nonetheless, the halacha is that if you are tolesh, if you pluck the wool out of the sheep, you're certainly not over the lav of goizes. That's one example. Then there's the prohibition against doing katsira before the Omer offering has been brought. So this is in the honor of the Omer. We started counting the Sfiras Omer from the second day of Pesach. On the second day of Pesach, the carbon Omer would be brought, and that would allow farmers to begin being Kotzer, begin harvesting their crops. And before that point, it was Asa. And again, we find that only katsira is forbidden, literally the classic form of harvesting, but kituf, plucking grains of stalk, would be allowed. So the question is, why don't we say the concept of a tolda there? Then there's another example which we mentioned, which is the Nachal Eson, the place where the Egla Rufa happens, when a murder occurs and we're unable to identify who the murderer is. We have to bring an Egla Rufa. And again, there's a lav there, and the lav says that the Nachal Eson, lo yizra b'Nachal Eson, one should never sow seeds in the Nachal Eson. It shouldn't become farming land which one sows with seeds. And again, the toldos of sowing would be mutter. So again, there we don't say the concept of tolda. So the question we asked is, when do we say the concept of others and toldos, and when don't we? Now,
can I ask a question in down at the Yoma?
Yes.
What about the fact of the beheret in the concept of negoim, which is supposed to be a tolda of se'ef and sepechet? Is that connected at all?
It's a good question, Adam. The concept is not connected, because in that case there, the Torah explicitly lists these other forms of tzaras. The concept of tolda that we're interested here is where we extrapolate using human reason. In other words, the Torah says don't do kotzer or don't do zereah, because those are melachos that we found in the Mishkan when they planted samamonim, or the herbs that were used for dyeing, and harvested those samamonim. We then come along and say, well, what's the point or purpose of kotzer? The point is to make things grow. Of zereah is to make things grow. The point of kotzer is to harvest things, and therefore any form of harvesting or any form of planting should be the same. And therefore it's not dafka zereah, which refers to putting a seed in the ground, but it's even noteah, which refers to putting a sapling in the ground. It's not only mevashel ofer, which refers to baking bread, or as in the context of the Mishkan. It's even mevashel, which refers to cooking things in a pot, and so on and so forth. So we use our human reason to extrapolate the extent of the melachos. And that's the problem of where the concept of toldos comes from in Hilchos Shabbos, as opposed to places in the Torah where the Torah explicitly says something and we just want to categorize it. And therefore, when it comes to Tzaras, or when it comes to Tum and Tara, when it comes to Ovus and Toldus with Nezikin, these concepts aren't problematic, because this isn't us extrapolating it, it's merely us categorizing the halachic terminology in the Torah. The Chiddush of Melachas Shabbos is that we extrapolate the melachos onwards. Now, the concept of Toldus is learnt in a Gezeres HaKosov, which we looked at earlier, we learned from various Pesukim. But nonetheless, what is this telling us about what Melachas Shabbos is? And again, I don't want to go through this all in too much detail, since we discussed this previously. But very briefly, we shouldn't forget that with Melachas Shabbos, what's going on is Lo Sase Kol Melacha. The real prohibition is Melacha. The Lamates Melachas are simply a way of doing a Melacha. But a Melacha itself isn't a physical action, a specific action. A Melacha is an achievement, an engagement with an achievement of a result. And therefore, it isn't analogous in many ways to other actions that the Torah talks about. So the concept of Melacha is both limiting and inclusive in a different manner to other things that the Torah talks about. So if the Torah says, don't be goyze's tzoin, don't shear sheep, we understand it's shearing that's prohibited and nothing else. If the Torah says, lo sizra, lo yizra b'nachalesim, don't sow the grounds of the nachalesim, this valley where the Eglah Rufa happens, we understand it's don't sow, it doesn't mean anything else. But with Shabbos, the Torah doesn't say Kotzer, Katsira, and Zuriya, or Charisha. Torah says, lo sase kol melacha. We learn out what sort of creative engagement with creative activities is included in the melacha from an analogy to the Mishkan, and we then extend it to anything which is a similar sort of achievement. And therefore it's legitimate, the concept of Toldus, or even Ko-Ovus, tells us that it should be extended in this manner. However, other actions, the Torah has told us what the action is, what the Ma'aser is, that the Torah has prohibited. So this is the concept of Toldus with respect to Hilchos Shabbos, as opposed to in other categories. It's also limiting, by the way. So there's the concept of a shinoi, which is going to be important at the end of this sugya, in which Rav Ashi says, this isn't derech, Rav Ashi Amar ein derech talisha b'kach ve'ein derech perika b'kach. This isn't the way that talisha and perika is normally done, and therefore, since it's not done in the normal manner, that's a reason why one should be potter, exempt from doing the Melachas Shabbos. Now, why does it make a difference whether it's done in an unusual manner or not? If someone says that if someone is up in Beis Din for ritzicha, for murder, and they wish to be potter from the Chiyuv Misa, and they say, when I pulled the trigger on the gun, I used my little finger rather than my trigger finger, and therefore this is a shinoi, and I should be exempt from the penalty of murder, this isn't going to hold much sway in Beis Din. So why is the concept of shinoi a halachically relevant one in Hilchos Shabbos and not in other contexts? And the answer is because Shabbos is a melacha. It's an engagement with an activity, and therefore it needs the fullness of an engagement rather than in a case where it isn't a melacha. So this is with respect to derech, the shinoi in the melacha. It's also with respect to melacha shein tzricha legufa, when I do a melacha without a need for the end result, which we looked at before Pesach, when I do a melacha where my intention is to remove a problem rather than a constructive, positive intention. So again, if someone traps an animal because they wish to have the animal, to eat the animal or to get its skin, its leather, that would be a melacha shetzricha legufa. I'm doing a melacha for the sake of the positive outcome of the melacha. Whereas if I'm doing the melacha in order to remove a problem, so I'm trapping a bee so that it won't sting me, then this is a melacha shein tzricha legufa. I'm doing it to remove a problem rather than the positive achievements of the problem. And again, if someone up in Beis Din for an accusation of ritzicha, of murder, defends themselves by saying it wasn't that I wanted to positively kill this person, I really wanted to remove the irritant, again, that wouldn't hold much force in the ruling of Beis Din, because again, it's not the law of melacha. So this is the concept of Toldus. Now, I referenced in the source sheet one exception to this rule, which is Shemitah. Now, in Shemitah, the Gemara looks for a source to tell us exactly the opposite. It looks for Gezeres HaKotzer to tell us that there are no toldos when it comes to the working of the land in Shemitah. And the Gemara derives this from the Pasuk in Vayikra, which I printed in the source sheet. Uvashana Shvius, Shabbos Shabbos Niel Aretz, Lo Sizra, Sodcha Lo Sizra, V'Kamacha Lo Sizmar. Do not sow your field and do not plant your, do not prune your vineyard. And then it carries on, don't harvest your the sfichim, the wheat stalks that have grown. And don't harvest the grapes that have grown. So the Gemara in the source under that, in Masechet Shabbat Daf Gimel Amud Aleph, asks, why does it need to list Zemira, pruning, since pruning in Shabbos is a tolda of Zriya? And similarly, why does it need to talk about Betzira of vines? Surely the harvesting of vines is a tolda of Ketzira. And the Gemara answers, Lememra da'ahani toldas mechayev, achrin talo mechayev. On these toldas you are chayev, and on other toldas you are not chayev. So this Gemara in Masechet Katten poses several difficulties. The first difficulty you see is that the assumption of the Gemara is that with Shemitah there would be a concept of toldas. And therefore the Gemara asks the question, why does it need to list separately, don't harvest your wheat and don't harvest your vines, your grapes in the vineyard? Surely the grapes in the vineyard would be included because they are a tolda of harvesting. Why is it when it comes to Shemitah, we assume that toldas would be included? Number one. Number two, this Gemara seems explicitly to be like the Meiri, not like the Rambam, because it explicitly calls Betzira, the harvesting of grapes, a tolda, as opposed to Ketzira, which is the Av. And in Shabbos we saw that the view of the Rambam is that both Betzira and Ketzira are fellow others because they're effectively achieving the same end result. So these are two questions from the Gemara in Shemitah. And the answer to this question, the first question, as to why the Gemara assumes there's a concept of Ovus and Toldos with Shemitah, is exactly because of what we've just explained. When it comes to other things like Gzizas Tzon, shearing sheep which belong to Kodshim, we have no reason to think that what the Torah is talking about is a melachot, is achievement of a certain creative engagement with a certain sort of creative activity. And therefore we assume that the Torah says shearing, it means shearing is the problem and nothing else. Shabbos, as we said, is unique because it's melachos, it's engaging with a certain sort of creative activity. And therefore, by extension, exactly the same lomdos, exactly the same svara applies to Shemitah, because Shemitah is a din in Shavisa Sa'aretz, in the resting, in the Shabbos of the land. And therefore, the Gemara's assumption is that Shemitah is parallel to Shabbos, in that it would have Ovus and Toldos in the same manner as Shabbos has Ovus and Toldos, because it's not a particular action which is prohibited. Actions we won't extend. It's engagement with a certain sort of achievement of an outcome, and therefore the assumption would be that why should an achievement of different sorts of outcome make a difference? So this is the first point to be said.
Question. Hello. You were saying how with Shemitah and Shabbat you've got the different concept of the Issa, in that it's really about engaging in a particular activity with a particular aim, rather than the general category of prohibitions where there's just a certain action that you're not allowed to do. Why does anyone sort of spell this out explicitly, or you're sort of gleaning this from how the Rambam and others understand and speak about Shabbat?
It's not spelled out explicitly in the terminology I've used, but the Rambam, I think, spells it out explicitly the whole time. Because if you think about the language of the Rambam that we just saw over here, of Shekol Achas Mehem La'aka Dovom and Gedulov Miskavein, the intended outcome is to uproot something from its place of growth. The Rambam is explicitly telling us that what matters in melachos is the intended outcome. And similarly, with every other example that we've seen where the Rambam talks about co-others, he always moves into discussing what the intended outcome is. The final place I'd reference in terms of this is the Rambam in Perish Mishnayos. Have a look at the Rambam which we've looked at previously on our Mishnah, here in Daf Ein Gimel Amud Aleph, the Mishnah of Kal, of the list of the Lamatas Malachos. And again, the Rambam speaks about this at length and defines this. The best I have as a source for this idea, if you want it more, so first of all, Josh, in answer to your question, I'm arguing this is what the Rambam says in Mishnah Torah and in Perish Mishnayos, where he keeps on saying, why are these all co-others? Because you're setting out to achieve the same end result. That's point number one. If you want a more explicit later source, have a look at first of all the Kas Mishnah and Magen Mishnah on the Rambam then in Mishnah Torah when he explains the idea of Avos and Toldos. And there's a Teshuvah of Rabbi Ashkenazi on the topic. Rabbi Ashkenazi lived in Egypt in the 1500s. He's more famous for writing the Shiur Mekubetzes. You may have come across in certain Masechtas, we don't have one in Masechet Shabbat, but in other Masechtas, there's a work called Shiur Mekubetzes, which means collated views. And he wrote a very lengthy commentary on Shas, in which he collated various opinions, and that's his magnum opus. That's the work he's most famous for. He was the Rebbe of the Arizal in Nigla. Arizal had different Rebbes in Nista in Kabbalah, but in Nigla the Arizal was a Talmud of his, and he also has a Teshuvas. And he discusses this teshuvah in there. I'll post on the WhatsApp group the exact reference to the teshuvah, which I don't have on hand. And he also speaks about this topic. I will stress here that I'm not an expert, unfortunately, in the writings of the teshuvahs of the Shiur Mekubetzes, but I saw this referenced in one of the works of the Contemporaries Forum. So that's where I know this reference from. It's not my own source.
So should we assume that we're now in the world of the Rambam alone, and other Rishonim might understand this differently, or generally across the board we should assume that melachot are this engagement with an aim, etc.?
I think it's across the board. This particular piece of evidence is found in the Rambam, as I said, but first of all, don't forget that Rashi also basically buys into the theory of co-others all the way through our Amud. In the top of the Amud, when we were speaking about Rashi references it with Ofer and Mavashel, and then he references it with Zoreah and Notea, where there was the parallel brisa about different forms of planting. So Rashi also buys into the idea of co-others, and even the mere idea of an Av and a Tolda really is already indicating this concept. And there's many other halachas of Shabbos that reflect this, including Shinoi, or in our sugya it's referred to as derech. A malach has to be done in a certain derech, and so on and so forth. So I don't think this idea is unique to the Rambam, though the Rambam takes it further perhaps than other Rishonim do. I just want to use the minutes available to me just to finish off. How would the Rambam defend himself from the Gemara in Masechet Shabbat with reference to Shemitah, which the Gemara assumes does have a concept of us and Toldos, and yet refers to B'tzira as a Tolda rather than an Av, and therefore asks why does it need to be said explicitly by the Gemara. I don't know a full answer to this question, but I have a suggestion to make, and that may be that the Gemara is referring it to a Tolda as a Tolda in the Maskana, meaning everything that we said about Shemitah also having Avos and Toldos is all a Havamina. The Gemara in Masechet Shabbat tells us that Shemitah doesn't have Toldos, or at least it doesn't have Toldos that we can extend through our own human reason. Gufa learns from this pasuk. Why does the Torah need to specify B'tzira when, after all, B'tzira should be included in Ketzira? And why does it need to specify Zomer when Zomer should be included in Zoreah? Answers the Gemara to tell us that only those listed, yes, and not other things. Which means to say that in the Maskana, Shemitah is not analogous to Shabbos. It doesn't have a concept of Toldos, and therefore it only includes that which the Torah specifically says. In which case, all we know about are the categories the Torah explicitly says, which are Kotzer and Boitzer, and Zoreah and Zomer. In which case, all we're dealing with is these four, and it makes sense to include the two as the Av and the other two as the subcategories within them. It's in a sense the latter sort of Av and Tolda, a bit like Adam's Av and Tolda with respect to Taras, where the Torah explicitly lists all the forms of Taras, and we just categorize them as which ones slot into which, rather than it being the halachically significant term of an Av and a Tolda. With respect to Shabbos, for example, someone who does two melachos two activities which are both included in the same category of Av or Av and Tolda would only get one set of makas. Would only get one onesh. As we saw, if someone is Zoreya Notea, as we saw at the top of the Amud, they only bring one chatos. This is all considered one malacha. In Shemitah, there isn't such an analogous halacha, because it's only a minute that Shemitah has these categories of Av and Tolda. But in the Maskana, Shemitah isn't like that. Shemitah actually goes back to being more like shearing sheep with kodshim and other such things, where there isn't a category of inclusion, and therefore perhaps that's why the Gemara refers to it as an Av and a Tolda, rather than as per how the Rambam paskins that they're both Avos and Toldas. So we'll stop there for today because we've run out of time. And Tuesday there will not be a shiur because of various Yom Ha'atzmaut things going on. But next Sunday, please God, will continue, and the focus then will be at looking at what exactly is Kotzer. Is Kotzer removal from the grounds? Is it removal from the place of growth? Is it removal from its source of growth? And in source sheet 1, I put the lengthy passage from Reb Chaim, which if you're able to work through, fine. If you're not, don't worry. And more importantly, in source sheet 2, I just made a collection of various Mariam Komas which are relevant to this discussion, and please God, we'll look at that next Sunday.
Are there parts of the Reb Chaim that we can look at which are where we can sort of focus in? Or not really?
The first paragraph of Reb Chaim is important. The very first paragraph. And then maybe the penultimate paragraph also is one that's worth looking at.
Okay, brilliant.
The difficulty with Reb Chaim is not what he says, but the unfamiliarity of the concepts. If you have learned Zeroim and you're familiar with Upsitz Nokov and Upsitz She'ena Nokov, which means maybe I'll just explain those halachic terms, and that maybe will make it a little easier. There are many halachas which discuss whether something is still considered growing or not. In the concept of our interest, Masechet Shabbat, obviously, if I pluck something from its point of growth, I want to know whether it's still growing or not. But there are many other examples where it's important to know whether something is still growing or is already considered picked. And normally speaking, the intuition is very clear. If it's still attached to the tree, then it's growing. If it's detached from the tree, then it's picked. Very simple. However, there are borderline cases which are less clear. In the source sheet that I gave out, we'll look at some of the borderline cases, such as a fruit where the stem has already dried and it's no longer being yonek, no longer drawing sustenance from the tree. So these are some examples of borderline territory. The Mishnah and the Gemara are fascinated by another set of examples of borderline growth, which is an utzit, something in a pot. And when it's in a pot, to what degree is it still yonik? To what degree is it still considered drawing from the space and the ground and the geographical location within which it is? So, for example, there's a halacha of Shemitah. In Shemitah, I'm not allowed to work, as we just saw, the grounds, the earth of Eretz Yisrael. I'm not allowed to benefit from things that have grown, things that have grown are hefka and so on and so forth. What happens if I have a plant pot in Shemitah? Is this considered Gedulei Oretz of Eretz Yisrael? Does it have the Kedushas Eretz Yisrael? And so with all the halachas of Zeroim, Truma and Maser and all other halachas that only apply to Eretz Yisrael, are things in plant pots considered growing from there. And the Gemara makes a distinction between an Utzitz Nokov and an Utzitz She'ena Nokov, a plant pot with a hole in and a plant pot without a hole in. And this is the sort of topics that the Reb Chaim is talking about and trying to understand many sugyas, including our sugya of Kotzer, but not solely our sugya of Kotzer. Amongst the Makomos he brings is a source which I printed in the handouts also, in which the Rambam talks about a clod of earth from which something is growing, in other words, effectively a plant pot of sorts, where something is growing from it, and discusses how Kotzer would apply in that situation. So that's the topic of what the Rambam and the Reb Chaim are looking at, and maybe that will make it a little bit easier to work through the sources. But if not, don't worry about the Reb Chaim, and just learn the Maram Komis that I've given out, which are just, those are the ones I'll go through. I'm not going to go through the whole Reb Chaim. I'll go through those sources.
Can I just say a couple of things on an administrative basis, Rabbi?
Sure.
Just firstly, lovely to see everyone back and welcome everyone back to the program, and also some new faces. Lovely that you've joined us as well. I wanted to wish Arichad Yomim to Karen and Jeffrey, who both unfortunately lost their father recently. And any learning we do, as well as being L'Ilui Nishmat my own father within this year, should be L'Ilui Nishmat their own fathers as we go forward. As the rabbi said, on Tuesday, there's no program because of Yom HaTzmaut. Please feel free whenever you want. Of course, the Chavrutas should be set up, but the way we're working this program, and I'm happy to take any feedback, is people to arrange their own Chavrutas through the usual video sort of channels. I'll give my own details on my own Chavruta with Josh. So anyone who wants to join us who haven't got a Chavruta, please do so. And those who want to share their own Chavrutas with others, so occasionally people haven't got a Chavruta, that I think would be good. Gamzu Latova, and it would mean people can join up with whichever group they want to join with. The plan will be to have the Shiurim twice a week if possible, and they'll just run on these set times, ideally, so 10 to 10:30 on Sunday, and normally 9:30 to 10 on Tuesday. I'd like to, I've seen joined us, I don't know if he's still with us, Martin, who's on duty as a doctor. So particularly kol hakavod to him for joining us, and wish him hatzlacha and thank you for all his efforts. And I think that's really about it. Lovely to see everyone back. And thank you also to Gary, who set up the program and is hosting us today, for his efforts as well. And I think Gary wanted to mention, I think there's a Safaria teaching program sort of this afternoon, isn't there, Gary?
It's a 1 hour training from 4 until 5. All welcome. If you are joining, please set up a free Safaria account for yourself. So just log in and create an account for yourselves. Thank you, Adam. Thank you, Rabbi.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
See you all next Sunday. Take care.
Thank you.